The following program was provided by an independent producer solely responsible for its content. The opinions expressed do not necessarily represent the views of this station, its staff, board of directors, or underwriters.
Welcome to another episode of Speaking with the Senator. I'm Senator Kevin Avard. I represent District 12 here in New Hampshire. And there are a lot of issues that are coming up before the Senate and before the House. And so we want you to be informed, and periodically we'll have either state reps or people that are pushing out bills in order for you to understand really what's going on. Today we're going to talk about a bill that I actually helped co-sponsor. It's HB 440, and it has to do with our constitutional rights, and basically to assemble. And the effects of the executive orders, emergency orders, or whatever you want to call them, they seem to be interrupting some of our constitutional rights. And so I had my guest, Jim Kofalt, Representative Jim Kofalt, and you hail from Wilton,
yes,
next to Milford.
Correct.
Well, I just want to welcome you to the show.
Thank you, Senator.
And you are the prime sponsor from the House.
That is correct.
And so, you know, you see a lot of stuff on Facebook. A lot of people push things out through social media, and there's a lot of information. Some people say there's a lot of misinformation, what's going on. And there seems to be a floodgate of hey, look at this, you know, through the back channels, and you kind of wonder, well, you know, what I'd like to hear from the actual prime sponsor or the person who's actually put in the legislation. And this is one of those bills that I think is important. A lot of people have spoken up. If you look in my email box, I can guarantee there are at least over 1,000 people saying enough with the emergency orders, right. And you know, and I know there's a balancing act, and I know that the governor has a difficult time balancing all this. But at the same time, we want to protect our individual liberties, and those are in question right now. And so you're the prime sponsor, HB 440, and it has to do with the executive orders and the emergency orders and the right to assemble in church or whatever. So tell us a little bit about it. What was the impetus for this whole bill?
Right. So this actually started out focused on religious liberty. Interestingly, after the bill was filed, there was a Supreme Court decision here in New Hampshire that in effect underscored the importance of religious liberty and did a lot of what we were aiming to do. What we did was we made some changes to the bill really to focus on a concern that has come up since a Superior Court decision was made last year. And that has to do with emergency orders, and the specific case was about peaceable assembly. But really, the concern that came out of that was a statement by the Superior Court that the governor may limit or suspend constitutional rights during a state of emergency.
Not the Supreme Court.
This was the Superior Court of New Hampshire.
Okay.
And so that statement on its face, I think, should set off a lot of alarms for people. You know, there are a lot of bills that have been making their way through the legislature having to do with emergency orders, and you know, they kind of run the gamut from a sort of broad-based statements about people's right to deny vaccines and masks and things like that, to things that are, let's say, more narrowly defined. And I would put this in the category of more narrowly defined, in the sense that this is not an anti-mask bill.
Or vaccine.
Or anti-vaccine or any of that. Now, personally, I tend to think favorably about a lot of those bills, but this bill is not an anti-mask bill. This is specifically about the suspension of constitutional rights during a state of emergency, period. So what happened is last year, a couple of people filed suit against the governor in his capacity as governor and said, we think that you are infringing upon our right to peaceable assembly by shutting down restaurants and bars and limiting the number of people who can come together. And the state argued that the constitutional rights could be limited under a state of emergency. Interestingly, the individual who acted on behalf of the state and put forward that argument is a guy named Daniel Will, and he is currently the nominee to the New Hampshire Superior Court. For a lot of us, that raises concerns that we're looking at elevating somebody to the Superior Court who has effectively made the argument that state of emergency justifies suspension of constitutional rights.
When you say constitutional rights, are you being narrow in your scope, or is it in a broad sense?
It's broadly stated in the Superior Court decision. It's very broadly stated. So the concern is, if you think through some scenarios, because I think a lot of people will listen to this and they'll say, but I didn't feel like my rights were infringed too terribly during this state of emergency. This bill really is more about what could happen than about what has happened. So if you consider what might happen, for example, take a group like the CDC declaring that we have an epidemic or a pandemic of gun violence.
Now, Fauci did say that recently.
I have heard statements to that effect from the CDC and others. Now, if a governor were to declare, and I don't think this governor would, because he's been great on Second Amendment rights, but if a governor were to declare that gun violence is an emergency and I need to declare a state of emergency, the only mechanism in place to stop that at this point would be both houses of the legislature in New Hampshire passing a concurrent resolution to say state of emergency is over. Well, what happens if the governor's party holds a majority in one house, not necessarily the other, but one house, and they stand together and say, no, we want to give that governor license to do anything they want. So really, the Superior Court decision, in effect, is saying that as long as the governor is doing what he or she is doing in good faith, it's okay.
But it hasn't gone to the Supreme Court.
It has not yet gone to the Supreme Court. That's true.
But that is obviously the next step.
It would be the next step. I think passing this bill makes a lot of sense. There were Democrats who voted for it. I appreciate that. Former Speaker of the House Shurtleff voted for it. I think these are people who recognize that constitutional rights are fundamental and shouldn't be infringed.
So why not put out a CRCR, a constitutional amendment for that?
Well, first of all, this is really just addressing what we see as a need for clarification in the emergency order statute. So that's one. I guess I would argue that the Constitution already says that these are rights and that these rights are unalienable. If you look at the New Hampshire Constitution, you read Part 1 of the New Hampshire Constitution, it uses the word unalienable a number of times. So I guess I see it more as a statutory clarification than as a constitutional right or reiterating something that's already in the Constitution.
Right. And so I'm one of the co-sponsors. Who else co-sponsored this bill?
Keith Ammon was another co-sponsor.
He's being popular these days.
He is. He's taken a lot of heat, but he's a very, very principled guy.
Yes, he is.
And actually, I ended up co-sponsoring a piece of legislation that he did around religious freedom and freedom to assemble and worship during a state of emergency as well.
Yeah, and it's really critical that people should be able to have that right. Looking back in history, when there was the plague back in Europe, the bubonic plague or the Black Plague or whatever you want to call it, a lot of the Christians are the ones who stayed behind to help out, during that particular time. And they still assembled, You know, they took precautions, but when people fled the area where it was outbreaks, they stayed behind and they helped. And I just, you know, that was then, but they should still have the right to be able to worship, because that is really fundamental to the core of who we are, is being able to assemble, to worship our God in a way that we choose fit, that we see fit. To infringe upon that, you know, I was troubled by it, and I know that a lot of people, when they go to church, there's a lot of counseling there. There's help there. There's spiritual guidance. There's a way for you to also reach out and help others. And when that's all shut down, I think society breaks down. I really do.
Well, I think what bothered a lot of people most is that there were a lot of so-called essential services defined by governments throughout the country
like
and
the
throughout
liquor
the world. And they included things like liquor stores, for example. And yet, religious services were not seen as an essential service.
It's a different spirit.
It's, I think, you know, for a great many people out there, they may not always be the most vocal, and they may not raise their voices and complain as much. But I think for a great many people, religious services are absolutely essential, and certainly more essential to them than going to the liquor store.
And, you know, I found that, you know, one of the churches I go through here in Nashville, Gate City, they fogged it between services, meaning when I say fog, they put out the antimicrobials, they wore their masks, they wiped down railings, everything that you touch. You walk in, there's a nurse to greet you, and you got to go through the gauntlet of hand sanitizers and the scanners. You walk into the bathrooms, and I swear you could eat off them. It's immaculate. And there were a couple people that did come down with COVID, but you know, they could have got it at Market Basket, touching one box or touching some fruit or touching, you know. And I love Market Basket. I'm not trying to down them, but you have to go food shopping. You got to go food shopping, and you got to go to the gas station. You have to go through work and blah blah blah. Why not church? Especially when they went through these kind of precautions. The revolving door in the Market Basket, you know, they're not sanitizing as the church does. I watched how they sanitized, and I'm thinking, for them to be closed down because of this, remote doesn't work with church with me. It doesn't.
Well, there are, you know, there are a lot of people who have suffered greatly from the sense of isolation that this has brought on, and communities of faith are an antidote to that. So, you know, I guess I feel pretty strongly that treating religious institutions as a kind of second-class category is it reflects a worldview that I think most people in our society actually don't share. I think most people do regard religious services as essential, and yeah. So we, you know, Keith's bill, HB 542, I believe, is aimed at, again, clarifying the emergency statute and just saying houses of worship, home Bible studies, any kind of religious activity where you're getting together is permissible during a state of emergency, period.
Otherwise, we're going to have to go back to the catacombs. So where's the bill now?
So HB 440 is, it passed the House in early April, a couple of weeks ago. It's moved on to the Senate, and so it will be heard by the Senate Judiciary Committee. And my hope is that the Senate Judiciary Committee will do the same thing that the House Judiciary Committee did, which was to pass it through with an ought to pass recommendation. And if it sees any changes coming back from the Senate, then of course it'll come back to the House for another vote or a committee of conference to reconcile the differences. But you know, my hope is that this will move on to the governor's desk, and you know, that he'll support it as a guy who supports constitutional rights.
Have you had any conversations with the executive branch at all?
I have not directly. I think we kind of wanted to see how it was received and how it's moving along. And I think the time will probably come fairly soon to have that conversation.
So what was the temperature in the House when it passed? A voice vote or?
It was a roll call vote. It was a bipartisan vote. So there were, I would say that the floor speeches against it were primarily saying, gee, none of us like wearing masks, but it's the right thing to do. But it's not a mask bill. That's
right.
the bottom line is that I think that reflects a fundamental misunderstanding of the bill.
Right.
The bill is just narrowly crafted. It says state of emergency does not trump the Constitution, the U.S. Constitution or the New Hampshire Constitution, period. That's all it says. And I would think that would be something that everybody can agree with. Like I said, there were a handful of Democrats who I think bucked their own party's trend on this because very
Which
often
is significant
the parties,
because they never do.
Yeah, very often the parties will, especially the Democrats, will vote on a straight party line. And I have a lot of respect for people who will look at the bill, judge it on its merits, and cast their vote accordingly.
And how's Keith's bill 542 going, or 52?
542 also passed. So I believe that's headed for the Judiciary Committee on the Senate side as well.
Getting into the hypothetical world, I back to Fauci, Dr. Fauci. It would seem to me that if you declare it a national health risk with gun violence and therefore a state of emergency, in particular to that, and the suspension of your Second Amendment rights, what's to stop them from free speech or any other?
Right. Well, I'm glad you brought that up because that's an example that came up in the Judiciary Committee in the House. Ian Hewitt, who's a very smart attorney here in New Hampshire, has commented on the fact that if let's say, for example, that we had a situation like another pandemic, if the governor believed that news reporting about it was causing panic, and therefore the governor said, we're going to shut down all the TV stations, radio stations, newspapers, as long as the governor was doing that in good faith, the Superior Court would be arguing that it's permissible because it was done in good faith by the governor to try to remedy a situation and avoid causing panic. And that's, so again, it's all a hypothetical. I think there's a lot of things here that would need to go before the court. But what's really disturbing is that statement that I made at the beginning, quoting the court decision, the governor may suspend or limit constitutional rights during a state of emergency. That's a concern, and that's what the bill is intended to address.
Yeah, and have you had any emails, any backlash coming from the public or
I really have not. And that's interesting because I think, again, for a lot of these bills where it's pro-mask or anti-mask or pro-shutdown or anti-shutdown, I've received an overwhelming number of emails from people who feel like things have been too restrictive and it's time to open up and let people be adults and make their own decisions and get back to business.
How do you think
but I
things
haven't
are going
heard
now?
much the other way.
As far as the loosening of the executive orders?
I'm happy to know that things are moving in the right direction. I would have liked to see New Hampshire be a little bit more like South Dakota or Florida and just say, let people make up their own minds. I think that most people will act responsibly if you give them the information they need to make a responsible decision. So and some people won't, granted, but I think those are the exceptions. And I think, I'd like to see us move further in that direction faster. But
I see some of the stores, obviously there's still, the restrictions have been lifted, the state employees, it's optional now, but people are still choosing to stay with the mask and all that. But it's funny, I do the food shopping and I have my favorite stores and sometimes I'll see in the produce department people camping out there and just, they'll pick out a grape or two and they pop it in their mouth. I'm thinking, hello, and then put their mask back on. I'm thinking, dude, did you just do that? Did I just see you do that? Mask or no mask, that's just not healthy. But, it's like, why bother with the mask? It's a charade. You're pretending that you're being precautious, but you're putting something in your mouth and then you're touching something else and then you move along. It's gross.
Right. I actually think that the masks, there are very legitimate concerns about the health risks of prolonged mask usage.
Well, kids playing sports with them. Yep. It's crazy.
But what I'd also like to see more of is more understanding and just respect between people. I've seen incidents. Somebody I know very well was practically assaulted outside the grocery store for not wearing a mask. And this is somebody who has a legitimate medical reason for not wearing a mask. But somebody decided to follow her out to her car and start screaming at her and screaming some pretty vile things. Yeah. So, everybody's different. People don't owe you their story about why they're not wearing a mask. There are real reasons why people don't. And I just wish people were a little bit less aggressive in trying to get everybody else to do what they think they should do, and just live and let live a little more.
I agree. And back to the kids' sports. Kylie, she's a senior and she plays lacrosse, and they're doing really well. By the way, North is doing so far so good, but she'll come home with like bruises, everywhere. It's lacrosse. Yep. But they're playing with the mask on, but you'll see them going for the ball. Mm-hmm. And it's almost like rugby. They're sweating up a storm and they're pushing and they're falling on each other. But got to have that mask on. It just seems bizarre. And some kids get lightheaded, when you're running with a mask on. I don't know. I don't think it's healthy. But that's a whole other issue. I know that there's some parents that are a little disturbed over it. If you're playing sports, if you're running, if you're doing track, you have a reaction to the lack of oxygen that you're breathing.
Well, I think the CDC just came out and acknowledged that if you're outdoors and you're passing people momentarily, that's not an issue. If you're out on a field playing a sport, it's not an issue. The day I was sworn in as the state representative, we met outside on a very windy, sunny day in a field, and we were seated 6 feet apart. And there were a whole lot of people who objected strenuously to that. And, I think we need to everybody needs to settle down and take it down a couple of notches.
So how many times have you seen somebody driving and there's nobody in the car with them, windows are up, and they got a mask on?
I've seen it 3 times today.
I'm thinking maybe that person should get a ticket because you're putting other people at risk. If you pass out because you're not getting enough oxygen, nobody's in the car. What are you worried about, and you hear that all the time. And I think people are starting to, see that. When I walk the trails with my pup, I have my mask right here in case if I see somebody getting nervous, I'll put it up, but it's a respect to them. I don't feel as though I need it. I don't choose to wear it when I'm driving. I don't wear it. But I really appreciate you coming in on the show to talk about this. It's an important issue. I know I'm getting thousands of people just saying, look, enough with the executive orders. I know it's really difficult on the governor's end as well because, he's the governor of everybody. Right. And there is a split population that says, no, I want this. Mm-hmm. And then there's another that, that's very liberty-minded and they say enough is enough. And he does have a very difficult balancing act, and I don't envy him on that particular task because he gets information that we don't get, But I do think that he's pushing for an opening up of the state. But I think the protection of our constitutional rights is critical.
It is, and if I may make one important point, I think there is a nomination right now to the Superior Court, and I would like to see us have judges in place who really believe in the absolute supremacy of constitutional rights. And my concern is that the current nominee to that position, Daniel Will, is in fact the same person who put forth the argument in this court case last year that constitutional rights could be or should be suspended or limited in a state of emergency. And so that to me is a concern. And I know I've spoken with my executive counselor, and I guess I would just encourage other people to think about that, potentially reach out to their executive counselor and express their concern about that. I think we need judges who really have a strong sense of fidelity to the Constitution.
So people in the state might not know that, especially people that have moved up into New Hampshire from Massachusetts, from out of state, they don't really understand the role of the executive council. Give us a brief understanding.
The Executive Council is an elected body consisting of 5 members. They approve all executive branch appointments, judicial appointments, and every contract over $10,000 in the state. So they have quite a lot of power, and that authority to approve judicial nominees, I think, is an extremely important one. So this is a little bit like the U.S. Senate confirming nominees to the Supreme Court or other federal courts.
Their check on the governorship.
They are there to approve or not approve that nomination.
And currently we have a majority on the Republican side.
We do, yes. I think it's 4-1. I ought to know that, but yeah. So we have a pretty good majority.
Dave Wheeler is the Councilor Wheeler is the executive counselor.
He is the executive counselor where I live, District 5.
That's us as well.
Yeah, in fact, he's the one who asked the previous nominee about this bill. Do you believe that the emergency powers authorize the governor to suspend or limit constitutional rights?
I know that there are other people that have saw that as a red flag, and it is concerning. So hopefully they make the right decision.
Right.
And how can people get in touch with you if they want to find more about this legislation? Or
if they want to reach me, they can go to my website, which is jimkofalt.com, JIMKOFALT.com, or just look me up on the state website where you can find your state representative.
Well, I appreciate you coming on the show and clarifying the bill, and for all that you do. We know that it's a lot of work. It is a sacrifice to be up there, both House and Senate, and to take the heat sometimes, and to be a leader through these murky times, if you will. Yep. So thanks for coming on the show again. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
And thanks for watching Speaking with the Senator. We're here for you, and so if you want to come on the show and talk about some legislation or something that's troubling you with the state or with the government in general, let us know. All right. Thanks. We'll see you next week.
The preceding program was provided by an independent producer solely responsible for its content. The opinions expressed do not necessarily represent the views of this station, its staff, board of directors, or underwriters.